Welcome back to another episode of the Spirit of Prophecy podcast. I appreciate you joining me as I review another documentary. And this documentary we're going to look at is one that came out 10 years ago, according to IMDb, which is hard to believe, and that is the documentary Marching to Zion. And so not only are we going to do a review of this documentary, in case you haven't seen it yet, or even if you have seen it, maybe you want to hear what I have to say about it, we're going to talk about the impact that it's had after 10 years. And I can say from experience, as somebody who remembers when this documentary came out and knows what it was like back then, especially as somebody who agreed with the beliefs of this documentary, I can say things have changed in the last 10 years, I believe, for the better. But before I get into the details of this documentary, I do want to just tell everybody a few things about my experience with this documentary, because at the time that it came out, at that point, I had never had any kind of contact with Paul Wittenberger, Steven Anderson, anyone in the new IFB. I was not very familiar with that world. I was somewhat familiar with Steven Anderson and had the things about him I liked, things about him that I didn't like. But I remember when I heard they were doing a documentary on this subject, I was very interested because I had not heard a lot of his preaching on that subject. But this particular subject was one I actually came around on even before post-trib. Now, for my personal experience, what got me going down this road, I started trying to prove the pre-trib rapture, and I couldn't figure out how to do that. And one of the things I kept running into and was just things about the Jews. You know, some of my responses to things were like, that's for the Jews, that's for the Jews, as we're trained as dispensationalists to say. But I have to present this to my church, and I'm like, this doesn't seem right, it doesn't seem honest. And so it got me looking at what I believe about the Jews and about Israel and future prophecy concerning Israel. And I actually flipped on that before I did from pre-trib to post-trib, because to me, this subject is so much easier to prove. When it comes to a lot of the details about the coming of the Lord, I am very gracious with other beliefs because it is hard to prove. Pre-tribbers, they think they're proving their point. Post-tribbers think they're proving their point. While I think post-tribbers make way more sense than pre-tribbers, I also think what we declare just these slam dunk proofs, it's not always the case. So I like to be sure of things. And before I ever preached a sermon against the pre-trib doctrine, I had preached a sermon against the Jews. In fact, the first sermon I ever did preach against the Jews was in December of 2014 around Hanukkah. And it was, I believe, shortly after that this documentary came out. And I remember when I heard it was coming out, I had pre-ordered a copy of the DVD. And I remember I ended up getting an email later from Paul Wittenberger showing that my name was going to be on the credits because it was considered like a donation. And I'm like, I did not want my name on there. I didn't want my name attached to Steven Anderson or anything like that. And I didn't even know if I was going to agree with the documentary. And so I emailed him back and said, hey, please take my name off that. I don't want my name in the credits. And he did. And I remember I was like panic watching the credits at the end, just thinking, please don't have my name on there. Please don't have my name on there. And thankfully it didn't. And I'm still glad it doesn't. But I will say that after I watched the documentary, I liked it so much. I was like, man, maybe I should have let my name be on there. But either way, it was something that it was very encouraging to me to see this documentary, see the things that they said, and it just kind of helped confirm in my mind that I was right about a lot of these things. And so this documentary, Marching to Zion, it featured several pastors in it. It had Steven Anderson, Tim Coleman, David Berzins, Donnie Romero, Matt First, Roger Jimenez, and MJ Felinius. And it also featured Tex Mars, who is now in heaven. But this documentary, it starts out, has a brief history of Israel that includes the most important part of their history, and that is their rejection of the Messiah and their destruction shortly after. That should never be ignored when discussing the history of Israel, their destruction in 70 AD was judgment on them as a nation for their rejection of Jesus as the Messiah. And a lot of futurists, a lot of dispensationalists, they know nothing about 70 AD. They never talk about it, but it is a very important part of their history, and it does that. And so after its destruction is mentioned, it mentions the return in 1948, but it starts off with a question about whether or not this was some kind of positive fulfillment of prophecy, or whether or not it was kind of a negative thing. And I think when it comes to the non-dispensational and the dispensationalists, they would agree there's some fulfillment of prophecy going on, but our side would view it as negative. Theirs would view it as positive, something to get excited about and support, which I believe is ridiculous. And so this documentary, it starts out showing the major differences between biblical Judaism and modern Judaism. And it is so important to always make that distinction. They are not related to each other. They are not the same. They are very different. People do not understand that. The Jews featured on this documentary, they have no problem admitting their beliefs are based on the Babylonian Talmud. It is defensive Zionist Christians that feel otherwise. There was a time in my life, if you would have asked me, what do Jews believe? I would say they just believe the Old Testament and not the New Testament. That's what I used to say, that very thing, and it's just not the case. They don't believe the Old Testament. The New Testament makes that clear, but even the words from the Jewish men that they interviewed would show that they do not believe the Old Testament. Their beliefs are based off the Babylonian Talmud. And so we are in agreement with the Jews. Their beliefs are based off the Babylonian Talmud. It's the Zionist Christians who are sympathetic towards them that deny that reality. So if you are trained properly by the news media, you will be triggered by them teaching what the Jews actually believe about Jesus. But this is important to show what people believe about your Lord that you are choosing to support. I think this is very important. And so this documentary covers very clear truths that are considered anti-Semitic, like the fact that the Jews killed Jesus. They show how the Jews don't really believe any of the Bible. And it blows the mind of the average Christian when they watch this and they find out how little of the Bible they actually believe. They don't take anything literal, not even Genesis. And so obviously there is quite a bit of variety of beliefs with Jews, but they interviewed several different ones in this film. There was a spectrum of them. There weren't any Orthodox Jews interviewed in this film, or I should say, the kind that really look like Orthodox Jews. I don't know if any of them would have considered themselves that, but I think most of the ones that they interviewed were probably from the Phoenix area. I could be wrong on that. But they did receive a lot of criticism. I remember this because they were claiming that they supposedly tricked the Jews into doing these interviews. And I know for a fact that is not true, and that is kind of a misleading thing to say, because all you have to do is watch the interviews, and they asked questions, and they answered. They let them talk. They let them show what they believe. Just because, they were going to, show their words as a negative thing does not mean they were dishonest. It's very clear what they intended to say in those interviews. And so they weren't being taken out of context. And you will see that if you listen to the interviews. And so it's very possible that had they known it was going to be negative, they wouldn't have done it. But at the same time, they didn't, I don't believe they told them it was going to be positive. It's like, hey, we want to know, what you guys believe about these things. And they just probably assumed they were like most Christians who are always looking for an opportunity to bless them and kiss their big toe. And so I just thought I think it's very misleading to act like they tricked them. So what did they do? Trick them into telling the truth? Because I challenge you to find something on there that they said that they believe that they would claim they don't believe. So they spend some time showing how historically Christians were against the Jews. And I think that's important too, because we've got a lot of our old time religion people, who in reality are following a form of religion that was popularized in the 70s, when Zionism had become a very big thing. It was after 1948, and they act like they're standing on old time religion, but supporting Israel was never a part of historic Christianity, but it has been in the last couple generations. The documentary also takes the time to show what a scoundrel Scofield was, which is very important because even though Baptists don't want to admit it, he was a major tool in getting this Zionist theology in the minds of people. And proof of that is the very fact that many King James only Baptists still interpret passages in the Bible exactly the way other versions do, and that also line up with Scofield's notes. Even though our King James Bible says something completely different, like it says seed, not descendants, not offspring, which makes it consistent with Genesis 3 when it says he saith not unto seeds as of many. Right there, that just shows that Scofield, even though he used King James, he messed with the doctrine with his notes. And so when your doctrine lines up with either Scofield's notes or other versions of the Bible, and you're claiming you're King James only, I'm sorry, I don't believe you. And I shouldn't have to. I'm sorry, I do not play along with your delusions. And I'm not going to use your preferred pronouns either if you try to tell me you're not a Scofield follower when you interpret Genesis 12 and you apply that to blessing Israelis today. I'm sorry, I'm just not going to go along with that. So in this documentary, it does a great job explaining what the Bible actually teaches about Genesis 12, or not even what it teaches, what it says, and shows the error that people are repeating like parrots, like trained parrots. And so one thing they cover on this documentary is something Zionists use to prove the Jews are the chosen people. And it shows how the Jews historically have been persecuted in the world. The Zionists say the world hates them because they are God's people. But you know what they will never do? They will never ask, why are they hated? What are the reasons that people give? Because nobody says we hate them because they're God's people. No, but as soon as you start talking about the reasons, you will just get labeled anti-Semitic. We are not allowed to do that. But the reality is, 1 Thessalonians tells us why they are contrary to all men, and that is considered anti-Semitic in our government today. But it's Bible, and we don't need to apologize for that, and this documentary didn't apologize for it. It just showed what the Bible said. There was also a section on the Star of David that is flying in a lot of churches today. Many Baptist churches have the supposed Star of David flying in their church, and the Jews they interviewed all admitted they don't know where it came from. Nobody knows where it came from, but yet at the same time, Baptists will defend the idea of the Star of David as it's called today, being the Star of David and not the Star of Remphan, even though the Jews don't even claim to know its origin. It is just repeated so much that it becomes fact, kind of like the traditional location of the Temple Mount. They can't prove it. There's proof contrary to it, but yet they've claimed it for so long, and they have just said, and they've just canceled anyone who dares question it and told you can't question it because it's offensive, it's anti-Semitic. But I'm sorry, we are Christians. We don't deal in delusions. We live in reality. And so I thought it was interesting the way they covered all that. But it's fun, too, watching just how upset one Jew got on there when he read what Jesus said about them or what Paul said about them. It was very clear this lost Jew understood the words of Jesus and the words of Paul more than most Baptists. He read those words and got about as upset as the Jews in the Bible did when Jesus said those things to him. I thought that was interesting. And one thing that is hilarious to watch on there is just seeing Anderson's lack of reaction to horrific things Abrami was saying. And I think he should not have reacted. He is interviewing him. He went there to ask them what they believed, and he did the right thing. And he sat there and he shut up and he let the guy talk and expose himself. I absolutely love that. But not only does this documentary show we should not support Israel, it shows how militantly pro-Israel mainstream evangelicals are. And so while it focuses mainly on the Hagees and the Robert Jeffress types, it also shows an independent fundamental Baptist example like Sam Gipp. And this was important because this documentary clearly was pointed towards influencing the IFB. And that part had an impact on me because I was somebody who knew who Sam Gipp was. I heard him preach many times. I had never heard him preach on prophecy. I had never heard him preach on Israel at that time. But when I heard that line about Jesus not being your Messiah, that shocked me. I thought for sure they had to have been taking him out of context. They had, there had to be something missing. And it got me looking into Sam Gipp and listening to some of his prophecy messages. And I did not know he was a Ruckmanite. I did not know he believed in 3 gospels. I did not know any of those things about him. And he was somebody who had infiltrated circles of Baptists that I ran with. And thankfully, things like this documentary exposed him. And thankfully, that cancer has been removed. And I don't see people inviting him back to the meetings in the circles that I run with anymore. And I am very thankful for that. I think this documentary, it humiliated him, and he deserved it. And it also scared other Baptists from being associated with him. And so I think this really helped just show the Ruckmanites for who they really are. And in my experience, I'm not seeing many Baptists use them anymore, except for the weird radicalized ones. But this documentary, it also exposed the Shekinah glory foolishness. That was also something I had no idea. I had heard Baptists my whole life talking about the Shekinah glory all the time. They always would say it, kind of like John Hagee too, glory. And I just assumed it was a Hebrew word. I just assumed it was in the Hebrew Bible. I've never read the Hebrew Bible. And to find out it's nowhere in the Hebrew Bible, to find out the origins of where it came from, it really shocked me and just showed me how much Baptists just repeat what they hear and don't actually study for themselves. And a lot of Baptists got embarrassed after they saw that. And thankfully, many have stopped saying it, even though there are some who still haven't got the memo yet. But I'm glad. I'm glad it exposed that, and we need to keep getting the word out about the truth about that, because Baptists need to stop saying that. They also spent a lot of time on here covering how genealogies don't matter. And I'll let you watch the document and see how they covered that and how they explain that. But folks, this has never been a genetic thing. It never was a genetic thing, and it certainly is not a genetic thing right now. The only genealogy that ever really mattered was the line of Christ, because there were certain prophecies that needed to be fulfilled that were prophesied through certain individuals and through a certain line, and those things came to pass. And so the Bible recorded those things for us. God preserved all those things for us, so when the Messiah would come, there would be no doubt of who he was, that it was in fact the Messiah, the one who was prophesied of. But now we don't need genealogies anymore. Now you just must be born again, because flesh and blood cannot enter into the kingdom of God. And so this documentary did a great job covering that. And that's an important thing, because many Baptists are still obsessed with an ethnicity. Many Baptists today in 2025 still think of the Jews as this special chosen ethnicity. And I think that's embarrassing that we're still there with many. A lot are figuring it out. Many are figuring out, but many more need to figure it out for sure. And this documentary definitely covers that and shows that. And so more importantly though, than all these things and just what I think about the documentary, what I liked, I do want to talk a little bit about the impact and just how different things are 10 years later. And this is based off my personal experience and what I've seen. And I will say, back in 2015, it was extremely hard to find independent fundamental Baptists who believe like this. Now, it's becoming more and more common. I am regularly finding out about more people, coming across more people, meeting more people who have seen the light on this. Many of them were impacted by this documentary. This was something that got their attention. Some people found it on their own. There are many people that are speaking the truth about this subject. And so while I felt very lonely back then, 10 years ago. Now, not so much. Now thankfully there are many teaching the truth. It's becoming more and more common. IFB churches are even starting to fellowship with people who are different in this area. That did not used to be the case. And it still isn't in many places. There still are some insecure independent fundamental Baptists that if you disagree with them on this, they will spaz out, they will throw a hissy fit, and they will behave the way they do, and they'll start declaring all kinds of curses on you and misapplying scriptures on separation and applying them to you. They'll start talking dramatic about the great apostasy, even though they have no idea what the falling away is of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, but they will call this the great apostasy. But a lot of IB preachers, the level-headed ones, the normal ones, the ones who aren't weirdos, trying to lead a movement or something like that, they're like, yeah, this is not something that's worth dividing over. And a lot of people are coming around on that, and that was not the case 10 years ago. The new IFB made it seem like people wouldn't fellowship with you because of that, but I think it was more because they behaved like maniacs. But no, many people who believe right, they are able to be fellowshipped with, even if they're different in this area. And so also another thing that has changed, and many of them will not admit this to you. Some will. Some have admitted it to me. They won't come out and say these things publicly, but many pastors within the independent fundamental Baptist world are reforming their teachings, even if they're not where we're at, even if they are not all the way to the position represented on this documentary. They are admitting that the Jews in their unregenerate state are not the chosen people. They still believe in special prophecies for them as an ethnicity, but they don't believe they're the chosen people. Many understand that Genesis 12 and Genesis 15 and the seed is about Jesus, not an ethnicity. Many have figured that out. Many are in agreement with that. Many understand that we are not biblically mandated to support the government of Israel. They might politically want to support them. They might think it's in America's best interest because they're our ally in the Middle East and all that. But no, they do not believe we are biblically mandated to support them, to bless them in any special way, unlike we would any other nation. Many are to that point, but yet they're still holding on to a special revival for them in the future. I can live with that. I don't agree with that, but I can definitely live with that. I hope there's a great revival for them in the future. I believe there could be. I believe theoretically it's possible. I do not believe prophetically it's guaranteed, though. So another thing, again, in the last 10 years, Ruckmanites have been driven from many decent Baptist circles. Thank God for that. Some people in the last 10 years, though, have actually become more radicalized in their false beliefs, which has actually freaked out a lot of good Baptists, causing them to back off on this. And let me just say, that was one of the things that started me down this road. I saw back when I was a pro-Israel, stand with Israel guy myself, I saw some guys that were just taking it too far. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is weird. And some of the ones too who have been corrected and have refused to correct anything, all it's done is it's made them get more radical, more extreme. There are some Baptists that are out there going as far, and even who don't even consider themselves Ruckmanites, claiming that the new covenant has not come yet, and it is not for the church, it is for Israel of today. And that is freaking out a lot of good, saved, independent fundamental Baptists. So I think that's good. You know, if these people aren't going to get right, then go ahead, get radical and freak out all the normal people. You'll just push them our way. So that I have seen that firsthand. And so what we're seeing right now, and this is something we've just been seeing in the last 2 years, in less than 2 years. Now, I don't believe Marching to Zion gets the credit for this, but at the same time, we are seeing very prominent religious and political figures getting these things right. There is an awakening happening on the subject of Israel. We're seeing big mainstream people. You've got the Tucker Carlson, you got Candace Owens, people who were supporting Israel not that long ago. You had Charlie Kirk, who was for sure a big Israel supporter, which is why I didn't pay that much attention to him. I just thought I just was get bothered when he'd talk about that. I liked a lot of his other stuff, but even he was starting to flip on some things. It's very obvious he was starting to see the light on these things. More and more of these big names. Kirk Cameron now understands Genesis 12. Kirk Cameron. I mean, this guy, he has been very vocal on all things popular and mainstream in Christianity for a long time. But now he's switching on this. Why? Because the truth's getting out and the truth about Israel is becoming more popular and mainstream. And again, if you are the radical type in the IFB who does not know how to exegete Scripture to save your life, that's the falling away. That's the great apostasy of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Even though 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, when it talks about the falling away, it's referring to a man of sin, somebody who is going to exalt himself above all that is called God, somebody who's sitting in the temple of God. And yet it's their side that supports Israel getting the land, that supports Israel building the temple. They're the ones actually supporting the Antichrist agenda, yet they will claim this awakening is a part of the falling away. You want to know why they do that? Because of their pessimistic, dispensational theology. And you know what? I do believe that God can give revival. I believe that there can be an awakening in this area, and I believe there is. And so while I'm sure Marching to Zion can't claim the credit for what's going on with the Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and people like that, thankfully, I do think they can take credit for an awakening that's already taken place within the independent fundamental Baptist world, with amongst many Christian people. And it was one of the many things, this documentary was one of the many things that God used to wake me up on this. And so let's keep screaming these truths from the housetop. We are advancing in this battle. We are marching forward to Zion. And I don't think we ought to let up for 1 second. I think we need to scream it louder. And we need to pray that more people get these things right. Let's stop moving forward as Christians as though everything's going to fall apart and get worse and we're just going to go into the tribulation. No, how about we start doing like they used to do and start operating as though we're going to be here for a very long time? How about we start thinking about future generations instead of planning for Armageddon, planning for a falling away? How about we plan for a revival and get truth out there and do it in a big way? And so I would encourage everyone to do that. And if you have not checked out this documentary, Marching to Zion, make sure you do. I'll leave a link to Brother Paul's website where you can go and you can purchase a copy of the DVD. You might be able to find it online somewhere to watch, and you can learn from it. When it comes to, who you recommend it to, I would say kind of the same thing I said about after the tribulation. Obviously, in American Christianity, we typically, we're very susceptible to personality cults. And obviously, men like Steven Anderson are not someone that you want to get to, you want to introduce somebody to who is susceptible to that kind of thing. But there are other men that are on here who are good men. You do have Pastor Matt First on here, who has a very good book called Who is Israel? And he has a lot of good material on this subject. I would definitely recommend him. There's others on here. And let me just say, too, that every pastor that is on here. Tim Coleman, David Berzins, Donnie Romero, Matt First, Roger Jimenez, MJ Felinius. None of them have anything to do with Steven Anderson anymore. So that's one thing you can say about that. So I don't even know if Steven Anderson would recommend this documentary because of all these horrifying heretics that he's had to call out before. So it'll be a lot harder for people who are susceptible to a personality cult to get sucked in when none of these people are not together anymore. And either way you look at it, the content is just so good. I do think people need to see it. This is one of my favorite documentaries Brother Paul ever did, mainly just because of just the information. It was really good, and it came at a really good time for me in my life. And so if you get a chance, if you've never seen it, I recommend you go check it out. If you have seen it, let me know what you thought about the review. And if you enjoy these things, make sure you like it, share it, and leave recommendations for other documentaries that I can cover in the future. There's been several already that I fully intend to check out, and we will get to those eventually. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. God bless, and we'll see you all next time.